PM Prime Minister Narendra Modi has announced he'll scrap 3 controversial agricultural reform laws. The surprise decision comes after a year of massive protests by farmers' unions outside the capital. Demonstrators say the legislation strips small farmers protections against big corporations in a country where the livelihoods of 2/3 of the population of 1.3 billion depend on agriculture. Mobin Nasir reports.
Victory at last. These farmers have held sit-in protests in New Delhi for a year, calling on the government to scrap agricultural reforms that they say threaten their livelihoods. And finally, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has given in.
Today I have come to tell you, the whole country, that we have decided to withdraw all 3 agricultural laws. In the parliament session starting later this month, we will complete the constitutional process to repeal these laws.
The legislation was introduced in late 2020 as part of a plan to modernize India's farming sector by changing how wholesale markets function. The laws let private companies operate silos and grain storage facilities, aiming to end the dominance of middlemen. They required all transactions by farmers to be in the form of written contracts. These changes, the government maintained, would attract up to $1 trillion in investment and create millions of jobs. But many unions argued that small-scale and subsistence farmers would lose government support and be forced to compete with large corporations. Despite the Prime Minister's promise to scrap the laws, some demonstrators aren't taking any chances.
Hold a parliament session and repeal these new laws. Bring back the minimum support prices. Until then, the farmers' movement will continue.
When it is completed in writing, only then will we leave, even if it takes 1, 2 or 3 months.
However, the U-turn risks unnerving investors, and economists have warned agricultural subsidies could drive up national debt and limit the government's ability to provide support to other sectors also struggling in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. Mobin Nasir, TRT World.
Vasuki Shastry is an associate fellow at Chatham House. He joins us now from Dubai. Thank you very much for being with us today. Vasuki, the government is under pressure to keep agriculture subsidies in place. Does this restrict fiscal space for Modi's government?
Yeah, I think the headline here is how difficult it is for this government, which has a majority in parliament, in order to introduce economic reforms of any scale. So I think the fiscal issue is an important one, but I think in the context of COVID, you have pretty much all governments in the world who are outspending, really focusing on social spending. So even if you park the fiscal issue for the moment, I think the big lesson coming out of today's decision is this government has essentially signaled that it is subject to pressure from the street. And, these farm bills are extremely important in order to reduce subsidies, in order to make farming more efficient in the country. And it is going to set back over the more medium-term economic growth and economic opportunity. So I think the fiscal issues are less important compared with the signal that this sends on economic reform.
Right, and these reforms were actually also meant to attract private sector investments and encourage corporate farming in the country. How badly does this U-turn affect these goals?
I mean, it does in the sense that, if you look at India's experience of opening up other sectors, that usually happened in fit and starts. For example, retail, that has been a 20, 25-year battle. And at this stage, the private sector, including foreign investors, have limited opportunity to invest in Indian retail. So I suspect this is going to be a similar story. It's going to take probably 4, 5, 10 years of education and persuasion on the part of the government. And they've got to use these carrots and sticks in order to get the farmers onto their side. So this is going to be reform in the long haul. In the short term, obviously, any private sector entity that had these grand plans, for establishing grain silos and indeed investing in agriculture, they'll have to put their plans on hold.
Right, and let's just focus on the protests for a moment. It actually went on for longer than a year. I mean, can you just remind us which were the most contested parts of these new laws and why farmers have been protesting for so long against them?
The farm protests were concentrated in northern India. where you've got, which actually contributes a significant slice of Indian agriculture production. So these are not necessarily only poor farmers, these are also rich farmers who essentially feel entitled year after year, getting these subsidies, essentially in the form of minimum support prices, in the form of free water and electricity. That really places a huge burden on the Indian state. But the farmers' ability to organize across particularly 3 states and to do it in a sustained fashion in order to draw public support at a time when India essentially shut down due to COVID, really is a remarkable testimony to their ability to organize and to not politicize the protests. So they didn't, for example, allow any political party to come and participate in these protests.
Right.
So with very important elections coming up next year, I think the central government calculated that this is not a battle worth fighting at this stage.
Right. Vasuki Shastry, thank you very much for being with us today.